Sergeant Alex Monroe was no stranger to tension. After all, she had spent the better part of the last year in a war zone, where every moment demanded vigilance. Yet as she stepped onto Flight 238, returning from her final deployment, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of relief. Her body ached with exhaustion, her mind buzzing from the adrenaline of the past days, but the thought of home kept her moving forward. She barely registered the murmurs of the other passengers as she made her way down the aisle. Her uniform, once a source of pride, now felt like a beacon drawing unwanted attention. Alex was used to the stares, some admiring, others uncomfortable, but today she just wanted to disappear into her seat and close her eyes. To her surprise, as she handed her ticket to the flight attendant, she was directed to first class. "Enjoy your flight, Sergeant Monroe," the attendant said with a warm smile. Alex blinked in disbelief. She hadn't flown first class in years, if ever. The plush seats, the extra legroom, the promise of a peaceful journey. It felt like a dream. She thanked the attendant and settled into her seat, allowing herself a rare moment of relaxation. But the serenity was short-lived. As the plane began to fill, Alex noticed a man in a sharp suit boarding with a sense of entitlement that seemed to precede him. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who was used to getting his way, and as he approached, his eyes locked onto Alex. There was something unsettling in his gaze, something that made her instinctively brace herself. He stopped beside her, glancing at the number above her seat. "You're in my seat," he said, his voice calm but laced with a subtle threat. Alex looked at her ticket, then back at him. "This is 3A, she replied evenly. "I'm in the right seat." The man's eyes narrowed. "First class is for those who've earned it, not for charity cases." Her stomach tightened, anger flaring beneath the surface. She had faced worse in the field, much worse, but something about this man's words struck a nerve. The uniform she wore was a symbol of sacrifice, of service. And here, thousands of feet above the ground, this man was questioning her right to be there. "I'm a soldier," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor of fury she felt. "I've earned my place." The man smirked, a cold, condescending expression that made her skin crawl. "Soldiers belong in the back, not up here with the rest of us." Alex's mind raced, 1,000 retorts flashing through her head, but she held her tongue. Confrontation was not what she needed right now. She had survived war zones, insurgents, and the loss of comrades. She could survive this man's prejudice. But as he continued to stare at her, the tension between them thickened, becoming almost palpable. The other passengers were beginning to notice, their eyes flicking between Alex and the man, curiosity and discomfort mingling in their gazes. Just when Alex was about to say something, the flight attendant reappeared, sensing the brewing conflict. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "This woman seems to think she belongs in first class," the man replied, his voice dripping with disdain. The attendant's expression hardened. "Sergeant Monroe is exactly where she's supposed to be," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If there's a problem, sir, I'd be happy to assist you in finding another seat." The man's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. For a moment it looked like he might say something more, but then he turned sharply and stormed down the aisle, muttering under his breath. The flight attendant watched him go, then turned back to Alex with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry about that," she said. "If you need anything, please let me know." Alex nodded, grateful but still shaken. She watched as the man took a seat in the row behind her, his presence a dark cloud over what should have been a peaceful flight. As the plane began its ascent, Alex tried to focus on the thought of home, but the encounter gnawed at her. Her thoughts drifted back to the battlefield, where her enemies were clear and her purpose even clearer. But here, in the safety of a commercial airplane, she felt exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. The hours passed slowly. Alex stared out the window, the vast expanse of clouds below doing little to calm her nerves. She could feel the man's gaze on her, could sense his simmering resentment. Every time the flight attendant passed, Alex caught a glimpse of him out of the corner of her eye, his expression darkening with every interaction. When the in-flight meal was served, Alex barely touched her food. She had lost her appetite, her mind too occupied with the man's words. What did he know about sacrifice? About the sleepless nights, the fear, the loss? She had seen friends die, had fought to protect people she would never meet, all in the name of a country that sometimes felt indifferent to her struggles. But Alex knew better than to dwell on it. She had learned long ago that bitterness was a slow poison, one that could eat away at her if she let it. Instead, she decided to channel her frustration into something constructive. She reached for the in-flight stationery, her hand trembling slightly as she began to write. The words flowed easily, a mix of anger, pain, and a desperate need to make the man understand. She wrote about the sacrifices soldiers made, about the weight of the uniform, and the importance of kindness and understanding. By the time she finished, her hand ached, but she felt a sense of catharsis. Alex folded the note carefully, her heart pounding as she considered whether or not to give it to him. Part of her wanted to just let it go, to pretend the encounter had never happened, but she knew she couldn't. She had to try, even if it meant exposing herself to more of his contempt. The plane was descending now, the captain's voice crackling over the intercom as he announced their imminent arrival. Alex took a deep breath, clutching the note in her hand. She stood up, ignoring the curious glances from the other passengers, and made her way to the man's seat. He looked up as she approached, his eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, Alex saw something in his expression. Was it fear? Regret? She couldn't tell, and she didn't care. "This is for you," she said, holding out the note. The man hesitated, then took it from her without a word. Alex nodded, turned, and returned to her seat. Her heart was racing, her palms sweaty, but she felt a strange sense of calm. She had done what she needed to do. As the plane touched down, the passengers began to gather their belongings, the usual chaos of disembarkation setting in. Alex watched as the man unfolded the note, his eyes scanning the words. His face remained impassive, but she noticed the slight tremor in his hand. She didn't wait to see his reaction. As soon as the doors opened, Alex grabbed her bag and made her way down the aisle, eager to leave the tension of the flight behind. She was almost at the exit when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned, half expecting to see the man's angry face, but instead she found him standing there, his expression a mix of uncertainty and something else, something that looked like shame. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the noise of the other passengers. "I didn't realize. I didn't think." Alex studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his eyes. She saw it there, buried beneath layers of arrogance and pride. She nodded slowly, accepting his apology, though she wasn't sure she could forgive him completely. But that wasn't what mattered. "What's important is that you think about it now," she replied, her voice firm but not unkind. He nodded, looking down at the note in his hand. "I will," he promised. Alex gave him a final nod and continued down the jetway, her steps lighter than before. The air outside was cool and fresh, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the plane. As she walked towards the terminal, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The man's apology had been a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. It reminded her that even in moments of conflict, there was room for understanding, for change. And as she stepped into the welcoming embrace of her family, she knew that she had brought a piece of that change with her. The journey home had been fraught with tension, but it had also been a journey of growth, both for her and for the man who had wronged her. In the end, it wasn't the confrontation that mattered, but the connection that had followed. And that, Alex realized, was worth all the discomfort in the world. The days following Alex's return home were a whirlwind of reunions and readjustments. But even as she settled back into civilian life, the memory of the man on the plane lingered in her mind. She wondered if her note had truly made a difference, if he had taken her words to heart. Then one evening, as she was sorting through the mail, she found a letter addressed to her in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. She opened it cautiously, curious and a little anxious. Inside was a note from the man on the plane. "Sergeant Monroe," it began. "I don't know if you remember me, but I owe you a second apology. Your letter made me reflect deeply on my actions that day, and I realized how wrong I was. I've spent my life thinking I understood the world, but your words made me see how narrow my perspective has been. I've started volunteering at a local veterans organization, trying to give back in some small way. It's not much, but it's a start. I wanted to thank you, not just for your service but for the lesson you taught me. You've changed how I see the world, and for that I am truly grateful. Sincerely, Robert." Alex stared at the letter, emotions swirling within her. She hadn't expected to hear from him again, let alone receive such a heartfelt apology. The fact that he had taken her words to heart, that he had acted on them, filled her with a sense of fulfillment. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, a small smile playing on her lips. The encounter on Flight 238 had started as a confrontation, but it had ended in transformation, both for the man and for her. It was a reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, there was potential for growth, for change, and for connection. As Alex prepared for the next chapter of her life, she knew that the lessons of that flight would stay with her. The skies might have been turbulent, but they had led her to a place of understanding, where shadows gave way to light, and where even the hardest of hearts could learn to soften. And in that, she found a sense of peace that no amount of conflict could ever take away.